Who actually runs Britain? Most people would probably answer the government, but if the government isn't really making many of the decisions, then who runs the country? What if some of the most important decisions affecting your life are being made by organisations you've never voted for, whose leaders you've never elected, and which most people couldn't even name? Whether it's healthcare regulation, environmental rules, financial supervision, communications policy, education inspections, interest rates, much of modern Britain is governed by what critics called a Quango state. This represents a democratic crisis for some. For others, it's simply the reality of governing a complex modern country. So here's the question: can Britain abolish the Quangos and return powers to the elected politicians? Or has modern government become too complicated for that to ever happen? Today we're looking at the rise of the administrative state, why Quangos exist, why so many people dislike them, and whether power can realistically be returned to elected representatives, the people you think run the country. So a Quango, or quasi-autonomous non-governmental organisation, is an arm's-length body that exercises public powers while remaining separate from government departments. Examples would be Ofcom, Ofsted, Environment Agency, Care Quality Commission, NHS England, all that's on the way out, Bank of England. These bodies regulate industries, inspect services, write rules, enforce those rules, distribute public money, and provide expert advice. Most were created because governments concluded that certain tasks required specialist knowledge and should operate at some distance from day-to-day politics, but over time their influence has expanded dramatically. The result is a system where a significant amount of public power sits outside direct ministerial control and parliamentary oversight in a meaningful way. Before criticising Quangos, it's important to understand why every government keeps creating them. First reason is expertise. Modern governments oversee extraordinarily complex systems. Financial regulations require economists. Well, you can't trust that to someone who just says they're an economist. Nuclear safety requires engineers. Would you want that dealt with by MPs? Healthcare administration requires medical experts. How many health ministers have any idea about healthcare other than taking granny to the doctor? Few MPs possess this level of specialist knowledge. The second reason is independence. The classic example is the Bank of England. When operational control of interest rates was granted to the bank in 1997, the argument was simple. Politicians might be tempted to manipulate economic policy for short-term electoral gain. But what about when the Bank of England doesn't like a Prime Minister and does the exact same thing and dumps bonds to cause a crash? Third reason is continuity. Governments come and go. Institutions remain. Infrastructure projects, environmental protection, financial supervision, but they require decades of planning, and let's face it, our current MPs, and I don't just mean the Labour Party, don't really plan decades ahead. Quangos provide institutional memory, and these aren't trivial arguments. They're the reason Conservatives, Labour and coalition governments have all relied heavily on arm's-length bodies. But critics argue that these benefits come at a price. Lack of accountability. In a parliamentary democracy, voters are supposed to know who's responsible for decisions. If politicians perform badly, they can remove them. If Quangos behave badly, they just write new rules for themselves. You could say, well, I'm a minister, but that's an operational matter for the regulator. And the regulator says, well, we're simply implementing legislation passed by Parliament. Suddenly, who's responsible? Political scientist Christopher Hood described this phenomenon as blame avoidance. Power is delegated, responsibility blurred, accountability weaker. Many voters feel important decisions are increasingly insulated from democratic control. Look at the sentencing guidelines that the Home Secretary couldn't affect. or the prosecution of sub-postmasters that Ed Davey, who was supposedly responsible for them, had no control over. He just had to take it as true when they said that they were fraudsters. And a lot of these regulators are so powerful, can you even abolish them? You still need regulations. You can abolish an inspectorate, but inspections still need to happen. You can dissolve an agency, but its functions and the need for it don't magically disappear. This is exactly what happened during the coalition government when they had a bonfire at the Quangos after 2010. Hundreds of bodies abolished, merged or reorganised, yet many of their responsibilities simply moved and didn't return to Parliament. The issue isn't really the existence of Quangos, it's the existence of complex government. Modern states regulate markets, healthcare systems, telecommunications networks, environmental standards, transport systems, countless other areas. It has to be done by someone, but if it doesn't pass the minister's desk, is there really accountability? Yes, there's committees. Yes, they sometimes get straight answers. Maybe what's needed is mandatory periodic reviews of Quangos with penalties such as abolition. What we do need is clearer responsibility, politicians who can't hide behind regulators, voters knowing who to reward or punish. And at the same time, we need the benefits Quangos can bring, like thinking beyond the short term. Take the Bank of England. Many economists believe independent central banks reduce the temptation for governments to pursue politically convenient economic policies. And with the very severe risk of a crash in Britain and an economic collapse because of the cost of borrowing, it would be tempting for a government to meddle. But you've got this independent body. How independent is the Bank of England when their former head actually is political and goes on to be a left-wing Prime Minister in Canada? It's just posted. There has been a shift towards decentralisation. You could decentralise things like planning, transport, economic development, environmental management, would actually make them meaningful, those decentralised roles. But look at Scotland and Wales. Have they governed for the better of the people, or just enjoy being one-party states? We can't simply abolish them all, much as I'd love to, but we do need regulation of the regulators. We do need management of complicated systems which is overseen. We do need ministers who are held accountable for those Quangos, and as a result have to have some influence over them. And we do need less Quangos.